Good morning. Daily Bible reading. We're going to read today from Genesis chapter 22. This contains an episode that is very familiar to all of us who have grown up in the church. It is a very striking episode where Abraham is commanded by God to sacrifice Isaac on an altar to him. And Abraham obeys, and in the end God tells Abraham not to do it on the moment of him actually killing Isaac, and provides an alternative sacrifice, the ram that is caught in the midst of the snare. Now, Abraham has already been compelled to give up one of his sons, Ishmael, who was clearly very dear to him. After the conflict between Sarah and Hagar, God told Abraham that he was to free Hagar and send Hagar and Ishmael into the wilderness, that Ishmael would be all right and that in fact he would be blessed. But Abraham has given up a relationship that was very dear to him on God's command. And here he has one son, Isaac. Isaac is no longer an infant here, but he's a young man. And this is the son through whom God has told him all his promises will be fulfilled. And he is commanded by God to sacrifice Isaac to him. Now, Abraham was clear here that this was God speaking to him. He made sure that it was a true command of God. And then he obeyed. He brought Isaac and two of his servants. They went to the place that God had commanded. They left the servants behind and went up to the mountain, and Isaac was bound on top of an altar. Abraham was on the cusp of killing him, obeying God when God told him not to. Now, this was a test. It says in verse 1, God tempted Abraham. In the letter of James, it says that God doesn't tempt anyone. And God doesn't tempt people in the sense that he entices us into sin, but he does test us. He tests us by giving us things that we are to do that are difficult and unpleasant and against our own inclination. He will not test us by commanding us to sacrifice our children, but he commands us to do things which are difficult for us and to make sacrifices of smaller, less important things that are nevertheless very dear to us. Abraham had the word of God that Isaac would be the way in which the son through which all the promises of God's covenant would be fulfilled. And yet he was told to sacrifice. Now, we have a commentary on this in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11, chapter 19 explains that Abraham believed that even if he did kill Isaac, that God would raise Isaac again from the dead. This is a divinely inspired commentary on the inward thoughts of the patriarch. There would be no way that anyone could know his inward thoughts except that it is given by divine revelation. And that also explains why whenever Abraham tells his servants to stay while Isaac and he go up onto the mountain, that he says he will return with the lad. He believes that whatever happens, the two of them will return. Hebrews 11 casts light on that. Nevertheless, it is a horrifying episode. And Abraham shows God that he is willing to obey his commands, and God reconfirms the covenant with him. Whenever you think about it, there had to be some way in which Isaac would survive, because God has already promised that Isaac would be the conduit through which the covenant promises would be fulfilled. So unless there was a contradiction in the words of God, which there can't be because God is perfect, then Isaac had to live. And Abraham, although I have no doubt he was terribly anguished by this, Abraham knew this. And of course, we know that this was a test for Abraham and that God did not intend Abraham to kill his son. And then at the end of the chapter, we have some scene setting. It talks about the children of Abraham's brother Nahor, and the reason that it gives the various children of Nahor is to show the descent of Rebekah, who was to be Isaac's wife. It mentions lots of sons, it only mentions one's daughter. Daughters generally were accounted as being less important than sons in that culture in those days, and Rebekah is the only daughter mentioned because Rebekah is the object of the whole exercise. It also shows that polygamy was common in those days, that Nahor also had a subsidiary wife called Reumah. This doesn't mean that this was right, it just means that this was the sinful habit into which even the people of God had slid, because they had not clear direction from God about the creation ordinance of marriage between one man and one woman. Genesis chapter 22, this is God's word. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, of which I will tell thee. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went unto the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand, and the knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him in the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And the angel of the Lord called up to Abraham out of heaven the 2nd time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. And it came to pass after these things, that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah, she hath also borne children unto thy brother Nahor, Huz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Kemuel the father of Aram, and Chesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel begat Rebekah. These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother. And his concubine, whose name was Reumah, she bare also Tebah, and Gaham, and Thahash, and Maacah. Amen.